Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today.
Ah,
We're going to be unpacking some really fascinating advice
yeah.
about controlling anger,
Mm-hmm.
specifically from an Islamic perspective. We've
Right.
got this presentation titled Controlling Anger, an Islamic Perspective.
Okay.
And it's really cool how it pulls from both the Quran and the Hadith.
Yeah.
So whether you're a devout Muslim or just interested in personal growth,
Mhm.
I think you're going to get a lot out of this.
What's really interesting is that this presentation doesn't just offer quick tips.
Yeah,
It dives into the core of what anger is and how it relates to our overall well-being,
Yeah.
using both spiritual and practical insights.
I like that.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, it hits you with this super powerful statement.
Hmm.
The strong person is not the one who overcomes others in a wrestling match,
Yeah.
but the one who controls himself when he is angry.
Right.
Now, this is a hadith,
Okay.
which is a saying attributed to Prophet Muhammad.
Mm-hmm.
I was blown away by this idea. It totally flips the script on what we usually think of as strength, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This idea resonates strongly with modern psychology's focus on emotional intelligence.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, real strength isn't about physical dominance.
Right.
It's about self-mastery, about having that ability to manage your emotions,
Right.
especially in challenging situations.
So it's like instead of being ruled by your anger, you become the ruler of your reaction.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah,
Now, the presentation doesn't just stop at inspiring quotes.
right.
It backs up this idea of strength through self-control.
Yeah.
There's some key verses from the Quran,
Oh.
which is the central religious text of Islam.
For example, Surah Al-Imran 3.134.
Okay.
And a surah is basically a chapter in the Quran states.
Yeah.
And those who control their anger and who pardon the people and all loves the doers of good.
Okay, so now we're getting into the connection between controlling anger and being a good person. I'm curious, though, what's
Yeah.
the link here? Is it saying that only good people can control their anger? Or that controlling your anger somehow makes you good?
It's more about highlighting the ripple effect of controlling anger.
Okay.
When you control your anger, you're not just benefiting yourself,
Right.
you're also contributing to a more harmonious environment for everyone around you.
Mm-hmm.
And this act of creating good, of benefiting others,
Yeah,
is something that is highly valued in Islam.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like you're not just holding back a negative, you're actually generating a positive.
Right.
But let's get down to brass tacks.
Okay.
What kind of practical advice does this presentation offer for actually controlling anger in the heat of the moment?
One of the simplest but most effective pieces of advice is again from a hadith.
Okay.
If one of you becomes angry, let him remain silent.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Silence is golden, they say.
Mm-hmm.
But isn't there a risk that silence could be misinterpreted? Like you're just sulking or giving someone the silent treatment?
That's a valid point, and that's why context is so important.
Yep.
This hadith isn't advocating for stonewalling or passive aggression.
Right.
It's about creating a pause, a break in that immediate reaction to prevent things from escalating.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it like hitting the mute button on your anger before you say something you might regret.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It's like that split second where, you should be quiet, but your mouth is already moving.
Right.
This advice is basically saying, win that split second battle.
Exactly.
I've tried that mute button approach before, and honestly,
yeah.
sometimes my face probably turned every shade of red trying not to explode.
Uh-huh.
But hey, at least I didn't say anything I regretted.
Exactly.
Right.
It's about regaining control, not suppressing the emotion entirely.
Okay.
But while silence can be a powerful tool in the moment,
Yeah.
the presentation also emphasizes the importance of digging deeper to understand the roots of your anger.
Okay.
It suggests taking the time to identify your personal anger triggers.
So not just reacting in the moment, but
No.
actually understanding what sets you off in the first place.
Exactly.
I can see how that would be helpful long term.
Yeah.
But how do you even start figuring out what your triggers are?
Self-awareness is key.
Okay.
The presentation suggests some things that resonate with what we know in modern psychology.
Yeah.
It could be things like journaling, practicing mindfulness, or even just taking a few minutes each day to reflect on your experiences
Right.
and notice what kinds of situations or interactions tend to provoke anger in you.
Okay. So we've got hit the mute button as an immediate strategy, and then some deeper self-reflection to work on the bigger picture.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What else does the presentation suggest?
Well, another piece of advice,
Yeah.
which aligns with the Islamic emphasis on seeking guidance and strength from a higher power,
Okay.
is the idea of seeking divine help through prayer.
No, that's interesting. While I totally get that for someone who's religious,
Right.
what about someone who's not?
Yeah.
Does this part of the presentation just not apply to them?
Not necessarily, even if you're not religious.
Yeah.
The act of prayer can be seen as a form of meditation or seeking inner peace,
Right.
which can be incredibly helpful in calming a turbulent mind. It's about finding that space of stillness and connecting with the sense of something larger than yourself, which can bring a sense of perspective and calm when you're feeling overwhelmed by anger.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. It's
Yeah.
like prayer, regardless of your beliefs, can be a tool for tapping into a source of inner strength.
Exactly.
But there's one thing that keeps popping up in this presentation that I'm really curious to unpack further.
Okay.
And that's the idea of forgiveness. It's woven throughout both the chronic verses and the practical advice.
Right.
And it seems like it's more than just saying forgive and forget.
Right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Forgiveness in this context is presented as a powerful force, almost like a secret weapon for achieving inner peace and transforming anger into something positive. It's not just a religious duty, it's a pathway to personal growth.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued.
Yeah.
Let's dive deeper into this whole forgiveness thing.
Okay.
What exactly does the presentation say about it, and how does it actually work?
Well, one of the key Quranic verses that touches on forgiveness is Surah Ashura 42.37,
Okay.
which states, "And those who avoid major sins and immoralities, and when they are angry, they forgive." What's fascinating here is how forgiveness is framed not as a weakness,
Right.
but as a characteristic of those who are strong enough to overcome their base impulses.
That's a powerful way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's like forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of carrying all that anger and resentment.
Right.
But honestly, saying just forgive sounds a lot easier than actually doing it.
Yeah.
Especially when someone's really hurt you. So how do we actually get from that initial anger to this place of forgiveness?
Right.
What does that process even look like?
That's a great question, and that's where the rubber meets the road
Yeah.
in terms of applying this Islamic perspective to your own life. And that's exactly what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll unpack the step-by-step process of forgiveness and how this seemingly simple act can have profound impacts on your well-being and your relationships.
I can't wait.
Should be good.
All right. See you next time.
See ya. Welcome back to our deep dive into controlling anger from an Islamic perspective.
You know, as we were wrapping up the last part, I was really struck by that whole idea of forgiveness
Yeah.
being presented as a kind of superpower,
Right.
not a weakness.
It's a fascinating reframing, isn't it?
It is.
The presentation really emphasizes that forgiveness in this Islamic context
Mm-hmm.
goes beyond just letting go of a grudge.
Right.
It's about actively cultivating a state of inner peace and even using it to transform negative emotions into something positive.
But honestly, when someone's really wronged, you just forgive. Can sound pretty impossible.
Yeah, of course.
So how do we bridge that gap?
Right.
How do we actually get from feeling hurt and angry to this place of forgiveness
Yeah.
that the presentation talks about?
It's definitely a process, and the presentation acknowledges that it doesn't sugarcoat the difficulty,
Right.
but it offers encouragement by breaking it down into steps that anyone can take.
Okay. I'm all ears.
All right.
What are some of these steps?
Well, one of the first steps is acknowledging the hurt.
Okay.
The presentation emphasizes that we shouldn't suppress or deny our feelings of anger or resentment. Instead, we need to acknowledge them, sit with them,
Yeah.
and understand where they're coming from.
So it's not about pretending the hurt doesn't exist. It's about facing it head on.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's only when we truly understand the depth of our hurt that we can begin to release it.
That makes sense. If you try to just bury the anger, it's probably just going to fester and explode later on.
Right.
But acknowledging the hurt sounds pretty painful in itself.
Yeah.
How do you move from that pain towards actually forgiving?
This is where the presentation draws a parallel to the Islamic practice of prayer.
Okay.
It suggests seeking divine help to find the strength and guidance to forgive. Now, even if you're not religious,
Right.
think about the essence of prayer.
Right.
It's about connecting to something larger than yourself, finding a source of peace and strength beyond your own limited perspective.
So whether you call it prayer meditation or just taking some quiet time for reflection,
Exactly.
it's about finding that inner stillness to help you process those difficult emotions and find the strength to move forward.
Precisely.
Okay, cool.
And as you cultivate this inner peace, the next step in the forgiveness process is to shift your perspective.
Okay.
The presentation encourages us to try to see the situation from the other person's point of view. Okay, I can see how that could be helpful, but honestly, when you're feeling hurt and angry, seeing things from the other person's side can feel like the last thing you want to do.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's not easy, and it doesn't mean condoning or excusing their actions.
Right.
It's about cultivating empathy. It's about recognizing that everyone makes mistakes, that we all have our own struggles and shortcomings, and that maybe, just maybe, there's more to the story than we initially perceived.
It's like instead of immediately labeling someone as bad or wrong, you try to understand the factors that might have contributed to their actions.
Exactly.
It's about humanizing them even when you disagree with what they did.
Exactly. And as you start to develop that empathy, it can create space for compassion to emerge. And compassion is a crucial ingredient in the forgiveness process. Because it allows you to see the other person, not just as the source of your pain, but as a fellow human being worthy of understanding and ultimately forgiveness. That's a powerful shift and makes me think about the ripple effects of forgiveness that we talked about earlier. If holding on to anger creates negative ripples, then forgiveness must create positive ones.
Right? Absolutely.
Okay.
And the presentation dives deeper into these positive ripples.
Okay.
Emphasizing that forgiveness doesn't just benefit the person being forgiven. It has profound impacts on the forgiver as well.
Okay. I'm really interested to hear about these benefits. What does the presentation say about how forgiveness actually impacts us on a personal level?
Well, one of the most immediate benefits is the release from the burden of anger and resentment. Imagine carrying around a heavy backpack filled with rocks. That's what holding on to anger is like. It weighs you down, drains your energy, and prevents you from moving forward freely.
That's a perfect analogy.
All right.
And forgiveness is like taking off that heavy backpack and finally feeling lighter, both physically and emotionally.
Precisely. And that feeling of lightness has a ripple effect on our overall well-being. Studies have shown that forgiveness is linked to reduced stress, lower blood pressure, and even improved immune function.
So it's not just some feel-good concept. It actually has tangible health benefits.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
And beyond physical health, forgiveness also has a profound impact on our mental and emotional well-being. It helps reduce anxiety, promotes feelings of peace and tranquility, and even fosters greater self-compassion.
It's like when you forgive others, you're also learning to forgive yourself for your own mistakes and imperfections.
That's a great insight.
Yeah.
And that self-compassion is essential for building resilience and navigating the inevitable challenges of life.
So we've got freedom from that heavy emotional baggage, improved physical and mental health, and even greater self-compassion, all of that from forgiveness. It's pretty incredible when you think about it.
It truly is.
Yeah.
And the presentation doesn't stop there.
Oh.
It goes on to explore how forgiveness can transform our relationships.
That makes sense. If anger creates barriers between people, then forgiveness must be like building bridges.
Exactly.
Right.
When we forgive, we open ourselves up to the possibility of reconciliation and deeper connection. It allows us to move beyond past hurts and rebuild trust.
But what about situations where reconciliation isn't possible?
Right.
Like when someone has passed away or the relationship is just too toxic to continue?
That's a really important point, and the presentation acknowledges that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation.
Cool.
Sometimes it's about finding peace within ourselves regardless of the external circumstances. It's about letting go of the anger and resentment so that we can move forward without being held captive by the past.
So even if the relationship can't be salvaged, forgiveness is still a powerful tool for healing and finding closure.
Absolutely.
Wow.
It's about reclaiming your inner peace and choosing not to let the past define you.
This whole deep dive into forgiveness is really shifting my perspective. I'm starting to see it less as a passive act of letting someone off the hook and more as an active choice to liberate yourself from the weight of anger and resentment.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it aligns perfectly with the presentation's emphasis on forgiveness as a source of strength and empowerment.
But I do have one more question before we move on.
Okay.
Earlier, we talked about the idea of anger as a motivator for positive change, like standing up against injustice.
Right.
Does forgiveness contradict that?
Yeah.
Does it mean we just accept everything even when things are wrong?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah.
And one that gets to the heart of the delicate balance between controlling anger and standing up for what's right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into controlling anger from an Islamic perspective.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the Quran and Hadith to practical tips,
and
of course that deep dive into forgiveness.
Right. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has.
And as we wrap up...
Yeah. I think it's important to circle back to a question you raised earlier.
Okay.
How do we reconcile this idea of forgiveness
Yes.
with the times when anger is justified?
Mm.
Like when we need to stand up against injustice?
That's the million-dollar question?
Right.
Because this presentation is all about controlling anger.
Mm-hmm.
But doesn't there come a point where anger is actually the right response?
Yeah.
It feels like there's this fine line between being a doormat and being a peacemaker.
You've hit on a crucial point.
Yeah.
And the presentation doesn't shy away from this complexity.
Okay, good.
It acknowledges that there are absolutely times when anger is a natural and even necessary emotion.
Yeah.
It's part of what makes us human.
So it's not about eradicating anger completely.
Yeah.
It's about understanding its purpose.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we make that distinction?
Right.
How do we know when anger is pushing us in the right direction and when it's leading us astray?
That's where the principles we've been discussing come into play.
Self-awareness, reflection, and that ability to pause before reacting.
Right.
The presentation suggests that when we feel anger rising, we first need to ask ourselves, what is the root of this anger?
Okay.
Is it stemming from a place of ego pride or a sense of personal slight?
Right.
Or is it arising from a genuine sense of injustice, a violation of our values, or a desire to protect ourselves or others from harm?
So it's like checking your anger's GPS.
I like that.
Is it leading you towards self-righteous indignation or towards a place of genuine moral outrage?
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And once you've identified the root of your anger, the next step is to consider the potential consequences of your actions.
Right.
The presentation emphasizes the importance of responding, not reacting.
That makes total sense. It's like before you hit send on that angry email or say something you'll regret.
Yeah.
Take a breath and ask yourself, is this going to actually make things better or worse?
Precisely. And this is where the principles of forgiveness and compassion come into play, even when dealing with injustice.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
I thought forgiveness was about letting things go, not taking action. How can you forgive someone while also fighting against injustice?
It's not about condoning the injustice.
Okay.
It's about approaching the situation with wisdom and clarity. The presentation emphasizes that forgiveness doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting wrongdoing.
Right.
It means choosing not to let anger cloud your judgment or dictate your actions.
Okay.
It means finding a way to fight for justice without being consumed by hatred or resentment.
So it's like you can be a warrior for justice without becoming a prisoner of your own anger.
Exactly.
I like that.
And this approach aligns with the Islamic emphasis on balance and moderation. It's about finding that sweet spot between passivity and aggression.
Right.
Between blind rage and cold indifference.
So it's about being assertive without being aggressive, firm, but fair.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. The self-awareness, the pausing, the forgiveness, even when taking action against injustice.
And that's what makes this Islamic perspective on controlling anger so powerful. It's not just about suppressing negative emotions.
Right.
It's about cultivating a mindset and a way of being in the world that promotes both inner peace and positive change.
And the beauty of it is that these principles are universally applicable.
Absolutely.
Whether you're religious or not.
Right.
Whether you're facing major life challenges or just everyday annoyances. These teachings offer valuable tools for navigating the complexities of anger with grace and wisdom.
You're absolutely right. This deep dive has been a fascinating exploration of one specific perspective on anger.
Yeah.
But the key takeaways resonate far beyond any single culture or religion.
I agree.
They tap into a deep human need for self-mastery, compassion, and understanding.
It's like we've been given a glimpse into a different way of approaching anger.
Yeah.
One that's not about winning or losing, but about growth, understanding, and ultimately creating a more peaceful and harmonious world, both within ourselves and in our interactions with others.
Beautifully said. And as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to leave our listeners with a challenge.
Okay.
The next time you feel anger rising, try applying just one of the principles we've discussed. Pause, reflect, seek understanding, choose compassion.
And see what happens. It might just surprise you how even a small shift in perspective can lead to big changes in your experience of anger and its impact on your life.
Thanks for joining us on this journey of exploration.
Yeah, this was great.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep seeking knowledge.